Welcome to Crimepedia Podcast. I'm your host, Cherry, this week, and with me, as always, is my BFF. It is the lovely Morgan.
Hello, Cherry. How are you?
I am great, thank you. I have just booked my accommodation for CrimeCon London 2024.
Ooh, very good.
Excited.
Tell everybody, when is that?
Okay, so if you've never been, CrimeCon is an immersive experience where you can have some fantastic sessions with some of the biggest names in true crime. We're talking about sitting at the bar next to somebody like Paul Holes. If you're American, you'll know who that man is. If you fancy sitting next to Colin Sutton in the lobby, you probably will find yourself sharing a lift with either him or somebody else who's massive in true crime. We have got the most amazing 2 days for you of brilliant, like we've got immersive stuff where you can go and take part. They have police dogs, and they show you how police dogs sniff out drugs, and they have psychologists, we have criminologists, we have doctors, we have coroners, we have police, we have all sorts of people to give you a real insight into what the world of true crime is all about, to be honest. And it's on the 21st and 22nd of September in London. You can find out all the details you need on the website, which is crimecon.co.uk. You can book your tickets through there. There's loads of different types. You don't have to pay for it all in one go. You can do it in sections. It makes a brilliant present. If you've got somebody who loves true crime and you want to give them a present, you can do gifting stuff. If you're a student, you get discounts. If you're blue light card holder, you get discounts. You can also get a discount by using our code. So our code is Crimepedia. You can put that in the sort of basket at the end when you're filling everything out to pay. If you put Crimepedia in as the code, you'll get 10% discount off as well. So make sure, if you are a massive fan of true crime or very interested in true crime, it's something that you don't want to miss.
No, it is a great time. I've been there, past 2 years? Lots of fun. So I would definitely suggest, if you have the ability to make it, definitely do so.
Yeah, I don't think you'll find anything else like it, particularly not in the UK. There's nothing else like it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's really, really good. We can't recommend it enough to you. We'll also be in Arkansas this year at True Crime Fest. That's in the first weekend in August. So if you can't meet us here in London, then you can come and see us in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas. And there's lots of details about that on allthelostgirls.org. So make sure you are part of that. And I know that some of our Patreons are coming to Northwest Arkansas to see us. So I'm excited to meet you guys in person. I can't wait. So it's going to be great.
Exciting.
I'm excited. I can't wait. I'm really excited. I'm excited to bring you this week's case. This week's case is really, really different. This week's case, the witness is actually the murder victim.
What?
I know. It's a very rare case, a very, very rare case. All the evidence and everything is handed over by the actual murder victim. So this is the murder in Ribble Valley. It's very unusual to have a murder victim talk you through their murder, and this week's case is extremely rare. A farmer shot on his way home from the pub is able to talk police through exactly what happened and even take them to the crime scene himself. But he's the only one who is talking to police about the crime. The local people have all closed ranks, and to this day, over 86 years later, people still refuse to discuss the murder. This is Crimepedia, and this is Murder in Ribble Valley. Okay, Morgan, so on March the 18th, 1938, a 46-year-old farmer called James Dawson, who was known locally as Jim, so that's what we're going to call him, Jim Dawson, he was drinking in his local pub, which is a pub called the Eddersford Arms. Now, this was after work. It was in the cute village of Bashall Eves. Bashall Eves is tiny, tiny little village in the Ribble Valley district of Lancashire. I looked up the consensus, and on the 21st of March 2021, the population on the census was listed as 174. So you can see how small this
Oh,
tiny little village is. It's tiny.
that is tiny.
Yeah, it's a
Tiny. Okay.
really small village. So this is the kind of village where everybody knows everybody else. You know that the house to the
Mhm.
left of the big oak tree is Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and you know that the person that lives outside the white fence is Mr. and Mrs. Brown, and everybody knows who everybody is. The pub was kind of like a traditional English pub, the local pub where everybody would go, and it's now known as Edisford Bridge Country Pub. It's a beautiful old English pub, what I would call a traditional English pub. There are dark wood beams across the ceilings. The chairs are like burgundy with dark wood. There's a beautiful wooden bar. The lights are all that like kind of orangey glow light. That's the kind of thing that you would traditionally, I think, associate with English pubs, a proper English pub.
Mhm.
And it's still
And
very
this is
much the same now.
and this is the type of place that looks like really just locals, right? So
Yeah.
of those 174, what we're saying, 99% of the people going to this place are
Yeah.
going to be in that 174.
I would think so. I would think so. It's a cute little local. It's not really tiny, but it is what I would call a cute English pub, a traditional pub. There's none of your like Weatherspoons part about it, or there's none of your like beautiful like like marble sideboards and
Yeah.
glass tables. It's proper old English. You know that somewhere in there is going to be a big old fireplace, and in the winter it's going to be cozy and warm, and you'll be able to go in and play like pub games and things like that. It's just one of those pubs that I love. I absolutely love about England is our old English pubs. I looked on
It's a house,
TripAdvisor to
basically.
see. No, it's a pub. It's a pub. It's a proper
No, I'm
old
saying,
brick
but it
wood.
looks
Yeah.
like, yeah, but it looks like a house. Like it looks like someone could live there. It's not like
Oh yeah.
a fancy, yeah, like a
It's
fancy
not a
building.
bar.
It's
Yeah,
literally
it's
a
not.
house.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a bar. So it's looking on TripAdvisor. I had a look on TripAdvisor to see what it's like now, and it's exactly the same. I think it is traditional. It has like traditional pub food, so you get like your pies, your chips, your fish and chips, your like roast on a Sunday, that kind of thing. Like beamed ceilings, just perfect. And I think
Hmm.
it wouldn't be very much different back in 1938. I think it would be very, very similar. And I reckon you've
Yeah.
probably still got generations of the same families drinking in those pubs now, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, our person, Jim Dawson, he lived with his sisters Lily and Polly's son Albert in the village. He arrived at the pub at about 7:15 in the evening. He was drinking gin and drinking beer, and at around 9 p.m. he put his coat on and decided to brave the weather to go home. Now, home was Bashall Farm Hall. I've looked here on the map. You can just go onto Google Maps, which is what I did. I had a look, and I
Hmm.
think that Bashall Hall Farm is now a wedding venue called Bashall Barn. It's about a mile away from the pub. Now we know that he travelled up Back Lane, and that leads off of the road that goes from the pub up towards what I can see as Bashall Farm Hall. And when I Googled it and then did the timeline search, it says it takes about 20 minutes to walk from the pub to his home. There is another farm in between that it could have been called Cheetle Farm, but he wouldn't have had to go up Back Lane to get to Cheetle Farm. So that's why I think when we're looking at it now, it's now up. And I think now it's a wedding venue, which would make sense because we do have that kind of thing now in England where they've turned old farms and farm barn buildings into wedding venues. So that wouldn't be a surprise. But I'm not 100% on that, but that's what I've looked at and that's how I've worked it out with the amount of time he would take walking. So as he was
Yeah.
travelling back up the lane, he leaves the pub. As you can see, if you've got this on your screen, he leaves the pub and he walks all the way up, and then he turns slightly right onto Back Lane. Now, when I'm saying these are lanes, they are single track roads. They are like hedgerows either side. They're farms and there are fields either side. This is not like a road where you've got houses either side, like leading all the way through. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. It would be pitch black at night. You wouldn't be able to see him unless your lights from a car or a motorcycle lit him up, or a tractor lit him up. He would be doing this all the time. He would know exactly where he's going in the middle of nowhere. It's just one of those things. That's how it would be. It doesn't sound very good, but in the country, that's what it's like here. It's a single track road, and you don't have lampposts there. There are
Right.
some lampposts. There were some lampposts up there, but very, very few and far between. So there were a few, but they didn't light the whole way up. As he was travelling up back lane, he noticed a man, or a male, I should say, leaning up against one of those lampposts. Now, as a car approached him, the headlights lit this man up completely. There were 2 vehicles that passed him that evening. The first car had 3 occupants in it, one of which was a guy called Tommy Kenyon. Now, Tommy Kenyon was Jim's farmhand that worked on his farm. So he recognised Tommy, knew who he was, but didn't know the other occupants of the vehicle. The second vehicle passed, but he didn't know who was in that one. When both cars passed, as he was walking, he realised that the man in the gateway next to the lamppost of the farm that he walked past had actually gone. The weather was really, really windy. It was bad weather. It was raining. He had pulled his coat close around him. And he says that he remembers hearing a click and then a stinging sensation in his shoulder. He thought it was just people messing around, somebody throwing a stone at him, somebody being silly. And he pulled his coat back round him. After having quite a bit to drink, he didn't really think much of the stinging on his shoulder, just carried on. So when he got home, he ate quite a big meal of roast pork that was made by his sister. He went to bed at around 22:10, it's reported. A few hours later, he woke up complaining of stiffness in his left arm. Now, Tommy, who he had passed in the car earlier on that night, had gone to a different pub. So he and the two other occupants of the car didn't go to the same pub that Jim was in. They went to a different pub. And he came home and he remembers seeing Jim sat in a chair by the fire. He said nobody else was up. Jim was just sat in the chair. They exchanged like pleasantries, just chatted to each other. Nobody was, there's nothing untoward going on. And then Tommy went to bed, and we think that Jim went back up to bed as well. When Jim went back up to his bed, he noticed that his sheets were covered in blood. So he was a bit surprised by this and was like, what's going on? He didn't want to wake the rest of the household up, so he kept quiet about this until about 8 a.m. when his shoulder was very painful. He called his sister Lily to come and check on it for him, and she discovered, to her horror, that he had what looked like a large gunshot wound to his shoulder.
Whoa, a large gunshot wound to his
shoulder.
And he's not thinking it's a big deal.
No, he's like, everything's fine. So they called the doctor out. A doctor came out, as obviously we're talking 1938. So the doctor came out and he examined Jim and he demanded that Jim go to the hospital. Jim really didn't want to go. He was like, look, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Just patch me up. I'm fine. He was really reluctant, but Lily eventually convinced him to go to the hospital, which he did. They went to see a private radiologist. Now, I don't know how normal this was back in the day to go to a private radiologist, because I would have thought he would have gone to the local hospital. And I've read different reports on this. One report that I read, or quite a few of the reports I read, said that he went to hospital. Other reports that I've read say he went to this private radiologist and gave the address. But there's more reports to say that he went to hospital. When he was in hospital, they discovered that he had what they described as an egg-shaped bullet lodged in Jim's shoulder. Jim told them that he didn't want to fuss. It's not a problem. It wasn't causing him that much pain. He was fine. He refused surgery despite them saying he needed surgery, and then he refused to get the police involved. Now, obviously, as we know nowadays, living with a foreign object in your body isn't the best idea. But Jim's rationality with this was to argue that there were plenty of war veterans that were living with shrapnel buried in their legs and in their backs and in their arms and stuff, and they were absolutely fine. But the following morning, Lily had managed to persuade him, because he was in a lot of pain, that she managed to persuade him to go back to the hospital, which he did, and doctors removed the bullet from his shoulder. When they removed the bullet, they were very surprised to find that they believed it had been homemade, and it was actually cut from a metal rod. The other
Wow.
strange
Okay.
thing, okay, is that the doctors said they don't believe that it had been shot from a gun. Because had it have been shot from a gun, the force of it would have blown his shoulder clean off. But
So
because of the way
what?
it was embedded in his shoulder, it hadn't gone in really far. They believed that it had been
Right.
shot from a catapult.
A catapult.
Yeah, so like a
What?
slingshot. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's really strange.
It is, isn't it? It's really. But now, immediately,
Yeah,
when I say to you, you've got an injury and it's from a catapult, what's the first thing that you think of when you think catapult slingshot?
like a rock or a pebble or something,
Yeah, and
or a
who would
kid.
be play? Who would? Yes, and
Kid.
that's exactly what I thought. Straight away, I thought, I wonder if this is a kid. Because a
But
kid's not likely to have access to a shotgun. If it was a shotgun, it's more
mhm,
likely to be an adult. So straight away, I don't know of many
yeah.
adults in my life that have had a slingshot or a catapult that they would just be randomly catapulting about in a street.
Okay, so if it was a catapult, what would be?
Yeah.
So he said he heard a clicking sound. What would a clicking sound be if it was if it was a slingshot?
Well, because I used to have one when I was a kid, which was called a
Yeah.
Black Widow, and it used to strap over your arm, and then when you pulled it back, it used to click, and then it used to go. So you'd like pull it back, and it would hold it, and then as soon as you let go, it would flick forward. So I always think that's what straight away came to my mind. That was it, like somebody that had it on
Oh,
their arm that was clicking it, possibly.
okay. Or
So
if it's like the follow through, that's what he's said
yeah,
he heard a click. If
then he heard
it's
the
like,
click.
the- yeah, okay,
Yeah. Or it could have been the click could have been hitting him in the back because he might have heard it like click over his coat or through his coat or whatever. I mean, how he
maybe
didn't see this when he got home or how he didn't check his shoulder and rub his shoulder and feel the blood, I'm not quite sure. But obviously he had been drinking
he
quite a
had
bit.
been
So,
he had been very intoxicated, I would think. If he
well,
didn't feel it or he didn't think about, and then the fact that he didn't like he saw the blood and he wasn't concerned about it, that seems like someone that's like intoxicated and they don't understand or realize like the severity of the situation.
or there could be another reason why he didn't tell
Okay.
anybody. We'll get to that. So Jim Jim reluctantly spoke to the doctors, explained what had happened. The doctors urged him to speak to police officers. He didn't want to speak to police officers, but again,
Mhm.
he then did go and speak to the police officers. They actually took him to where it all happened, and he walked them through exactly what happened, exactly where he was, and talked them through pretty much everything that happened that night. Now, Jim's health unfortunately took a turn for the worst, and he was moved to a local nursing home for care. Then the investigation took a turn for the worse because on the 22nd of March
Mm.
1934, 4 days after he was shot, he actually passed away. So
Oh,
the cause of death was registered as gangrene and septicemia from an infected wound.
and no one caught this before it got that bad.
No.
Wow. Okay.
So obviously now the
Man.
investigation changes to a murder investigation.
Yep.
When the police started investigating this, they found that the locals were very reluctant to give any information, even though Jim was described as a really well liked man, no enemies. Officers spent the early hours of Friday, March the 23rd, interviewing the locals, as well as searching all the local areas. So they searched the hedgerows, they searched the fields, they searched people's outhouses, people's farms,
Mhm.
rivers. There's a river that runs through for any sign of the weapon that could have been used to kill Jim, and they found nothing. Now, when I say that they're reluctant to talk, I mean they are reluctant to talk. They refuse to talk about it. Even later on, there was a documentary, and I'll explain to you about the documentary, but there's a documentary made about this, and you can actually watch in the documentary the guy called Barry does the documentary, and you can see him interviewing people locally, and he
Yeah.
says to them, like, what do you think happened? And they say, no, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. We're not interested. It's really, really
Why?
weird. It's really weird. Well, I'll explain to you in a minute my theory on that. The police said that they actually spoke to hundreds of people, and hundreds of people were interviewed, including practically every single resident in Bashall Eves itself. They were interested in identifying the following people. Then they gave this out as a list, okay? A broadly built
Hmm.
man carrying a walking stick, a man and a woman who had a farm dog with them, a young man wearing an overcoat, a trilby hat, who was in company with a woman wearing a green coat, and a fairly tall
Okay.
man wearing a light brown overcoat and a trilby hat.
That is very vague. Thank you.
It's a very, very in-depth list of who they want to talk to.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if you think about it too, that's a lot of people that
Oh, yeah.
could have potentially been in this very like tiny area. I
Yeah,
mean, at this time at night, it's dark. There should be very few, if any, people on
yeah,
either stretch of roads.
of course.
And they're naming off how many? I mean, how many people they're naming off? We're talking like
There's
nearly
one,
10
two,
people.
3, 4, 5, 6. 6 people.
Okay, 6 people.
Yeah.
That's probably like the most people that have been on that back lane that evening. That's probably everyone that was in that area.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's strange. Now that obviously the police are looking into this, but there were several theories that locals had talked about, but obviously not talked to the police about. Now we're talking, you know what it's like in a small village. Everybody
Hmm.
talks, but they just don't talk to the right
Yes.
people. Now the first theory, I'll give you a few theories and see what you think. The first theory was that Jim knew who that person was standing by the gate, and that it was a local lad, and he didn't want to get the lad in trouble. He didn't believe that it was very serious. He just thought it was the kid firing stones at him, thought it was a prank, didn't realize how seriously he was injured, and didn't tell the
Hmm.
police because he didn't want the kid to get in trouble. Obviously, he didn't know that he was going to get septicemia and gangrene and die. Um, but maybe he was protecting a local kid, and that's why the locals aren't speaking about it, because they don't want to get the kid in trouble.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's theory number one. And I think that's straight away when they said catapult, I straight away thought, oh, maybe it was a kid, firing stones, and he's just picked up a bit of rod by accident and has just fired it, not realizing that it's actually going to cause such serious harm. And if Jim is always mentioned to be a really nice man, everybody liked him. He's got no enemies that we know of. And so maybe he was like, he didn't want to get the kid in trouble, not realizing that it was actually a piece of a metal that was in his shoulder at the first time of reporting it, because he didn't know what was in there
Yeah.
until they actually took it out.
So do you think like, because when we're talking about this area, we're talking about, I mean, we're not even talking about like a village where this is. We're talking about
Oh no,
you
it's just a
have this
lane.
this farm, the
Yeah,
lane.
yeah.
So is it like a relative, like someone that he like a nephew
Yeah.
or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a mile.
okay?
The
Because
stretch of road is a mile from the pub to his farm. And we're talking about back lane, which is back lane is not even, it's not even a quarter of a mile. It's a tiny little bit of road.
and there's nothing between. There
No,
is
no, no,
nothing between
no,
the
no,
pub
nothing.
and
No,
the
it's just
farm.
farm. Yeah, it's just fields. It's just fields
Okay,
and
this looks like
trees and hedgerows.
there's one farm between it, but
Cheetle, yeah.
this happened on back lane, and if you look around
Yes,
back lane,
there's
really
nothing.
there's nothing. So if someone's
No,
hanging out around, this entrance to back lane, chances are they live on the farm.
yeah. Another reason why he would be reluctant to say who it was that did it if it was somebody he knew.
Hmm. Yeah,
So that's I think that's quite a good theory. Now
I just like it. Yeah.
another theory is that Jim was targeted because he was seeing several women in the village, and that they thought maybe a jealous husband might be the culprit, but there was no real kind of proof of this being true. Now, it had been said that James was seeing a married woman from Salford. So perhaps it could have been that, the married woman's husband. But I would have thought if there was a
Hmm.
better time and a better place to get him. But then saying that, it's a dark road. He could have been sat in the pub as well. He could have followed him. He could have shot at him with whatever. and
Yeah.
done it from his behind, from behind him. So that's the second theory. Now, the third theory was that the bullet was intended for Tommy Kenyon. Now, if you remember, Tommy Kenyon was Jim's farmhand that he saw in the passing car.
Mhm.
And a lot of people believe that Jim was shot in a case of mistaken identity. Tommy was believed to have been seeing a young girl called Nancy Simpson. And it was a secret relationship because her father, also called Tommy, didn't approve of the relationship. A few days before Jim was
Okay.
shot, Tommy Kenyon had a fight with Nancy's father, Tommy. They had a huge fight because Nancy had revealed to her father she was in the family way. So Tommy, her dad, jumped to the conclusion that the father of the baby was Tommy Kenyon. But
Okay.
Nancy went on to have a son. Now, when she had that son, she named another guy as the baby's father, a guy called Arthur, not Tommy Kenyon. But 10 days after Jim died, Tommy Simpson, Nancy's dad, was found hanged in a barn. And he died by suicide. Now, did he die by suicide because he felt guilty for Jim's death after mistaking him for Tommy
Uh-huh.
Kenyon? Or was there another reason for it? There are some local rumours that Tommy Simpson's farm was going under and that he had a lot of financial difficulties. And so a lot of people
Yeah.
locally believe that the suicide was because he was getting into financial difficulties and didn't know what to do. But also a lot of locals believe Tommy's suicide is because he felt really guilty for killing Jim.
But would Tommy Simpson know? He would know Jim Dawson personally, though, right?
He does know him. Yeah, he did know him. Yeah, they knew each other.
So how? I mean, unless Tommy and Jim look very similar, I
Mm.
feel like Tommy would have recognized that was Jim.
Well, I don't
And I
know,
feel
see, because
like
that night he was meant Tommy Kenyon was meant to be going to the same pub that Jim went to. Originally, he was meant to go to that pub,
okay,
but at the last minute, they changed their minds and they went off to another pub. So it was believed that Tommy Kenyon would be walking home that night back to
hmm
Bashall Farm. And so was it that Tommy
okay,
Simpson, who had a fight with him, a few days before, was it that he saw him thinking it was Tommy and just acted on
mhm.
impulse and hit him? Didn't realize it was Jim.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Hmm.
So there's a few theories there. Could it be a local kid and Jim being a nice guy? Doesn't want to get the kid in trouble, doesn't think he's in that much, he's in that much pain, so he doesn't think there's that much going on, everything's going to be fine, he's all right, doesn't
Right.
name who it is, refuses to talk about it. That could be that, right? Is it somebody that he knows, as in, is it somebody on his farm? Is it somebody, if you remember, right at the very beginning of this episode, I said that Jim lived with his sister and his other
Right.
sister and his sister's son, Albert. And I straight away
Okay.
thought, I wonder if it was Albert. And I wonder if Albert was messing about on the farm and maybe Albert hit him by mistake. And so he's made up this story that he was just walking along and he got hit in the shoulder and he doesn't know who it was, doesn't know who did it. Could it be that that was the case? And there's nothing, I haven't read anybody that has asked that question. So I
Right.
just something that I just thought of. Maybe it was somebody he knew. Maybe it happened closer to home than he's actually saying because he didn't want to get someone in trouble.
Right. I mean, to me, that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't see a grown man. Um, I could see a confrontation, right? Like a fight
Yeah. Yeah.
happening. Not here. I got a slingshot, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
peg you with a homemade bullet or a pebble or whatever it might be. Because that's almost like you don't expect to cause a huge wound, like a gunshot
No.
wound,
No.
when you're using a slingshot. If you're using a slingshot, it's an
It's just to be a
annoyance, right?
menace.
It's gonna
Yeah.
hurt. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
of
gonna be
course.
like gonna ping them, and it's gonna hurt, and you're gonna have a good laugh,
It's like
right?
a prank. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so if you are to the point where you're gonna we'll just say stalking someone, right? I'm gonna
Yeah.
wait for them, and I'm
Yeah.
going to hurt them. you're not just gonna be like, here, just gonna ping him in the back with a, you know, a piece of lead or a pebble or something with a slingshot. You're
Mm.
gonna have a baseball bat. You're gonna have a club. You're gonna
Yeah.
have a gun, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
you're gonna do what you think you have to do. You're not gonna
Yeah.
do like, oh, I'm gonna just hit him with a pebble and be an annoyance, right?
Yeah. And that kind of thing makes me think that that's maybe a kid's action or a younger person's action. They're just being a menace, you know, and they didn't mean any
Hmm.
actual real harm. They're just being like a little shit. Now, there was a documentary I mentioned earlier. It was made in 1979 and it's called The Village That Would Not Talk. Now, this is on YouTube. So
Okay.
go onto YouTube and watch it. It's only about 40 minutes long. It's not very long. Um, it's a guy called Barry Shaw. It's very old English, and the accents in it, they're from up north and they're very difficult to understand. Even I had trouble understanding their accents. The way that they speak is very it's not easy to understand. Now, Barry Shaw, he's very easy to understand. He talked about Jim's death and the mystery surrounding it. He also talked to Tommy Kenyon himself. Now, this is years
Yeah.
and years and years after the murder, and Tommy's a fully grown, I would say, a man in his maybe 70s in the documentary. And this is in like 1979. He looked a lot older. Now, Tommy actually admits that after Jim's death, that he felt that the bullet was meant for him because of the fight that he had with Nancy's father. He
Yeah.
talks a lot to the locals in it, Barry does, and they say because when the inquest came around, the coroner ruled it as an open verdict because they couldn't be sure for sure that this was an intended murder. So they couldn't actually say. So they left it as an open verdict, which means when something's left as an open verdict, it means that it can be reinvestigated again, and it means that somebody can be prosecuted for that occurrence. So Tommy Kenyon thinks that the bullet was intended for him. And when Barry goes to you can see him, he goes around to different farms, he talks to people at their gates, and they say there's one guy in particular, if you watch it you'll know who I mean, and he stands there and he says, no, I'm not talking about that. No, I've got nothing to say about that. No, because it was left as an open verdict, wasn't it? Which means somebody can be had for that. No, definitely don't want to talk about it. No, not gonna say a thing. And pretty
Yeah.
much everybody he interviews is the same. They're like the next guy that he talks to, and he's like, oh, no, like leaning on his farm gate. And he's like, oh, no. I don't want to talk about it, to be honest. No, I'm not interested in talking about it. And I thought, this is so weird. This is
Yeah.
so weird. You've got this guy that was hit in the back. Okay, maybe it was an accident. You know, if it was a tragic accident that he got hit in the back, it was just someone messing around, but the guy's died. This then becomes very serious. Is this village closing ranks on somebody? Immediately it comes to mind that it's somebody young. Because why are the village trying to protect somebody unless
Hmm.
it's somebody young? Why would
Yeah.
they
Because
want to protect Tommy Simpson?
who's dead now, right?
Yeah,
If it was
yeah.
Tommy Simpson, there's and he's dead, there's nothing to protect.
Yes, exactly. So then I would think, well, if he's died, they would just go, well, yeah, we thought it was Tommy because of the fight with the daughter. We thought that Tommy was trying to shoot the other Tommy, or he was trying to warn him off his daughter. But no,
Hmm.
they're still years and years and years later, they don't want to talk about it. And I read somebody else who commented on it saying it's still the same nowadays. Grandparents and other parents won't talk about it. It's very in the pub. They've mentioned it in the pub. It's a very taboo subject. People just put their heads down and carry on drinking their pints. It's like a really sore subject in the village, and no one will talk
That's
about it.
really weird.
I know, right? I was like, this is really, really odd. Now, another really odd thing that I found, and see what you think. During the police investigation into Jim's murder, it was found that a dog that was owned by Jim was found on Tommy Simpson's land. Now, this dog had been
Hmm.
shot. It was dead. It had been shot. However, whatever was used to shoot the dog hadn't fully penetrated the dog, just like in Jim's case. And the dog was sent off for further examination. And when it did, whatever was used to kill it couldn't be found because it had been taken out of the wound. So is it that the dog was used as target practice by the same person who then went on to shoot Jim? I
Yeah.
can't see a fully grown man like
Mm-mm.
practicing. I mean, he's a farmer. Farmers are pretty handy with a gun. A lot of farmers use guns. They use them to control vermin on their land. They use them to, to kill animals that they need to kill. They've all got guns. Most farmers that you'll talk to are pretty confident with using a gun. It's very rare for them
Right.
not to be. Why would a farmer be practicing on a dog? I can't see it. I just can't see that happening.
Mm-mm.
So again, was it a younger person that shot the dog, got in trouble, then messing about with his slingshot or whatever, or her slingshot or whatever, shot Jim, messing about, but then Jim's died, and then it becomes really serious because it's not silly pranks anymore. The dog's dead.
Right.
Okay, people can forgive a dog dying because we'll just sweep it under the carpet and don't talk about it and assume that the dog's gone missing. But then, a person gets injured and then the person dies. The injury, it could be put down to it was silly, it was a prank, but then they die and then it becomes very serious. In the documentary, Tommy Kenyon talks about a man called Henry. Now, Henry is Tommy Simpson's nephew, and he worked on Tommy Simpson's farm. He was asked by his uncle Tommy to dispose of a sack. He never asked what was in the
Okay.
sack. And Barry in the documentary asks Tommy what he thinks was in the sack. And he said he never actually asked. He didn't ask Henry what was in it, but he had a good idea. So when Barry pushes him a bit more and says, what do you think was in it? He sort of says to him, well, it could have been whatever was used to kill Jim.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Maybe.
Now, Jim
Yeah.
Dawson was
Huh.
buried, or is still buried, obviously. He was buried in the grounds of All Hallows Church in Mytton, where he was laid to rest on the 26th of March, 1934. To this day, over 80 years later, his murder remains unsolved. But is it really? When Barry asked Tommy Kenyon what he thought happened that night, this is what he had to say.
Tommy, have you got any other theories about the murder?
No, all I can think is it were intended for me, that's all.
Intended for you?
Well, I think so.
Now, why should you think that you were the man who was meant to be murdered that night?
For a simple reason, with me having a do with him and then playing about with his daughter, I fancy I thought, well, he'll not play about with her no more, like.
So if you couldn't understand what he just said, because it's difficult to understand, he basically says he believed it was Tommy Simpson that killed Jim, but that he mistook Jim for Tommy and the bullet was actually made for him.
I don't know. I'm still thinking this was a youth, and this was
I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why I've got that in my head. I don't think this was intended to be a serious injury.
I mean, I think the big tell in this is the fact that Tommy Simpson's dead, but yet, no one is talking. No one has talked.
No one's
Right?
blaming him, even though he can't stick up for himself.
I mean, besides Tommy Kenyon, right, coming up and say, "Yeah, I think it was meant for me." But besides that, no one has like even really pointed a finger at Tommy Simpson.
No, not at all. And I just find it really strange how everybody has completely just clammed up. They just refuse to talk about it. They don't even talk around it. They just flat out refuse to chat about it at all.
Mhm.
It's so weird.
Yeah. The only thing that makes sense is that they're protecting a child who made a terrible mistake, right?
Yeah. And even though I even think Jim was. I think it was the same. I think Jim was the same. From what I'm looking at and looking into this and piecing stuff together, it could be that Jim knew who it was. I mean, why a kid would be out that time of night in the freezing cold wind and rain, I don't know. But I think that Jim probably knew who it was that did that. and just didn't say anything, reluctant to go to the police because he just didn't want the hassle of it, didn't want to get on the wrong side of other people in the village because, you don't want to be falling out with your neighbours and stuff. And if he didn't think he was that seriously injured, he didn't really want to say. He never named who it was. He never named who he thought it might have been. He didn't. And obviously Jim and Tommy had no issue together. There was no issue between the two of them. It was Tommy had the issue with the other Tommy. So there was no bad blood with Jim and anybody. Even the police that did all the investigations, they all said nobody had a bad word to say about Jim. They had no enemies. He had no issues. He lived with his sisters in his farmhouse. He was a local farmer. No problems. Everyone at the pub knew him. And we know that it was verified that he did leave the pub when he said he did. Because another theory was that he was shot later than he says he was. So they actually got home because I think his sister testified something like he got home at 9:20 and then went to bed at 10:20. But obviously Tommy Kenyon says that when he got home at like 11:30, Jim was sat in the chair. So did he get up again? But we know that he did get up again because he found his sheets covered in blood. So we know that he got up before the 8:00 in the morning when he spoke to the rest of the house. He didn't want to wake everybody up, which is what he tells the police.
Once again, I don't see an adult using a slingshot to shoot at a dog, but I see a dumbass kid doing it.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I wonder if maybe Jim's protecting somebody.
I am with you on that. I think this was a kid who's just being a fucking jackass and
and made a mistake. Didn't mean to hurt him, but just made a mistake.
Yeah.
And then that ties in for me the target practice with the dog. That ties that into for me as well. Is that the dog got killed, and unfortunately it's on Tommy Simpson's land. Whether that had anything to do with it or not, I don't know. But it ended up being on Tommy's land. But it didn't say like it was in his yard. It could have been on his land, but right down in a ravine. It might not have necessarily been in his next to his front door in his back garden. It could be on the land that he owns somewhere. It doesn't actually say where the dog was found. But again, see, the dog, the bullet in sort of quotation marks was taken out of the dog. That doesn't sound to me like an adult either. That sounds to me like a kid who's like killed it and then thought, oh God, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm taking that out.
Yeah.
And then he's done it again and seen what it's like on a human. And of course, he hasn't killed him. He's just hurt him. I don't know why I've got it. I'd like to investigate this a lot more, but obviously it was 1934. It was a long time ago. And you haven't even got people that want to talk about the actual murder itself. So you're not going to get much out of people for this one.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's very different because it's not very often that you get a murder case where the victim talks the police through everything that happened to them. And takes them back to the crime scene and walks them through the crime scene and describes everything to them. And they get sort of first-hand witness statements from the actual person that dies.
Think about it. It sounds like he mentions like the guy at the gate entrance, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem he like pointed a finger at that person. It was kind of like,
but was there even a guy?
Was
there a guy at the gate?
True. Yeah.
Or could that be that he's just said that? Oh, there was a really mysterious guy there, so it must have been him. I don't know who it was. Actually,
this is not an area.
It wasn't.
This is not an area where some random guy is just going to be standing out on the road.
No.
So if there was a person there, chances are that Jim would have known who it was.
Yes, exactly. Exactly my thoughts. So dear old Jim, he sounds like a really nice guy. He's just, coming home from the pub. He's had a few drinks. He's walking home, back to his house. He gets hit in the shoulder. He's like, whatever that was. Goes to bed, doesn't realise, wakes up because he's a bit stiff and sore. Then realises actually, something's gone in his shoulder. They think he's then been shot, but the doctors say, well, no, actually, if it was a shotgun, it would have blown your shoulder off. So it wasn't a shotgun. So then he's thinking, oh, okay, maybe this wasn't intended to hurt me. So-and-so who I saw that was behind me, he didn't mean it. It was just a prank. So it doesn't say anything. Yeah. Obviously, then things get worse and worse and he ends up dying from his injury, but it's too late then. Mm-hmm. So I think this was a prank gone wrong.
Yeah.
I think this was mischief gone wrong.
I guarantee you, this is not the first time that if it was a youth, this isn't the first time the little shit has like used a slingshot to like hit people with pebbles or whatever, right?
Yeah. It's just
People know who did it. They know who did it.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. But they refuse. Even like 70 years on, when they did a round of reinvestigations, 70 years after it, they still wouldn't talk about it. Why?
Yep.
If a town won't talk, why? Because they're protecting someone. So who are they protecting? The vulnerable? The young?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Because
what I
like
think.
you said, if it was Tommy Simpson, he's not around anymore. So you could lay blame on him and no one would know. But other villagers would know. So the reason everyone's keeping quiet is because whoever did it was still alive and still living in that village. And they all closed ranks to protect them.
And it had to been someone who made a mistake and they didn't think needed to like
suffer
be punished
for it
any more than they suffer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'd be very interested to see who lived in the village at the time. I'd be very interested to see the dynamics of the families, whether you had any children that were of lower intelligence, that were maybe children that had learning difficulties back then. Was it something like that? And that's the reason why they're protecting them? I'd like to see who was living where, particularly around that area. Because, I mean, chances are it's going to be somebody who lives close there.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd like to know who the youths were at that time, where they lived, who they belonged to, and what kind of people they were. But I just don't think you're going to get there. Nobody's going to, unless you discover a diary from like a granddad or a grandma from back in the day that details exactly what happens. With this case, I don't think that there's going to be any way that you'd be able to definitely prove who did this, which is sad because I always think there's hope always. But with something like this, there's no DNA evidence, there's no DNA evidence on the slingshot. And I think that the only way you would know is if somebody actually wrote it down from back in the day.
This is so crazy.
I thought you'd like this one. I thought this was a very, very interesting.
I did like this. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So that's this week's case. That is the murder of Jim Dawson, bless him. The rest in peace, Jim.
Frustrating, but I mean, it was good. I did like this one.
Interesting. That's an interesting one. This is one I'd like to go and drive to the village and have a good old nose round, I think. Go and drink in the pub and have a listen to what everyone's talking about. Do you know the most people that visit Jim's grave now are criminologists and like criminal studies students? Because it's a completely baffling story, and they are the most. There's so many pictures of people sat next to Jim's grave. I found online, just people randomly taking pictures of themselves with his grave. It's really interesting.
It is a very interesting case,
and I'd never heard of it either, and it's just interesting to come across it.
If it was a kid, a youth, this is some serial killer like behavior right here, right?
The dog, and then trying it on the person,
dog, and then the person.
Yeah, interesting traits, isn't it? We all know when you start off things like that, what that can lead to. So it'd be very interesting to see what those people that lived in the village as teenagers went on to do in later life, where they are, what they're doing. It'd be really interesting.
Exactly. Well, with that, Sherry, how about we lighten the mood and we do a little thing called Dumb Criminal.
Hey, use a dummy and use a piece of shit.
Okay, so this one is a very strange dumb criminal. This comes to us from Utah. So this is in Provo, Utah. So a teenager there is in hot water after allegedly taping fish to ATMs in the Provo area.
Fish.
Yeah. And that and so he was taping fish to ATMs and he was documenting these antics on social media. Okay? So apparently this teenager was going around and he ended up taping at least 13 fish to ATMs as well as other objects. Okay. So these displays were shared on Instagram on the account called Fish_Bandit84.
Fish Bandit. It's like Home Alone and the Wet Bandits.
Yeah. So it's unclear if the creator of this account did all the fish taping. or if he pulled these from other areas. But he ended up getting caught. There was actually one video showing a trout being taped to a Provo police car, which garnered nearly 30,000 likes.
Wow.
Now, this teenager does face 2 charges of property damage, and they ended up being referred to the Juvenile Justice and Youth Services. And these 2 charges stem from the cost of cleanup.
I mean, how did that even come about? How do they even... Oh, I know what we'll do. Why don't we just go and tape fish to things? We can be called the Fish Bandit. It's like,
Yeah.
what? Why did you even get that idea, you idiot?
No, so this donut, is our dumb criminal for doing something so ridiculous and so trivial, and now he's in some hot water for it. Come on, though, really. But I gotta say too, this isn't the worst thing someone could have done.
This is just stupid. I mean, obviously, if he's going around murdering fish to do this, then that's not acceptable. But if they're already dead and he's buying them from like a supermarket and sticking them on things, it's just mischievous, isn't it? It's just like, this should be a slap on the hand and don't be such an idiot. But I mean, obviously, if he's going around stealing carp from someone's pond, or he's going around, stealing the fish, then it's slightly different. But I mean, to be known as like the Fish Bandit or the Wet Bandit, whatever he was known as, I mean, that's not the most manly kind of scary moniker, is it? The Fish Bandit.
No, it's not. It's not. But here's the thing too, and I don't know if teenagers don't realize it, but things like when you post things on social media, it's easily trackable, dudes. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Easy. So if they're gonna find you.
This is good for like
they're gonna charge you.
Just good for the future of criminals. If you're going to do dumb shit like this, then carry on, because you're going to get caught. And that's going to be good for society. So we don't want any really clever criminals getting away with things.
Right. So he's our dumb criminal, but I mean, come on.
I think he's a bit of a dumb minx. Maybe not a criminal as such. Maybe he's just a bit, you know. He's a bit of a minx, but there we are. But thank you very much for listening to us this week. I'd love to know your thoughts on this episode. What do you think who do you think was the culprit of Jim's death? I'd like to know what you get from that. And have a look. By all means, go onto YouTube and have a look at, it's not on for very long. Just go on, have a look. Just search for the town that would not talk, and it will come up. It's a 1970s, so obviously with that, it's not a very up to date one. Somebody's videoed it on a TV screen, but you can get the gist of it. And don't ask me to translate, because I can't do the up north stuff. So I don't understand half of what they're saying, just as much as you probably won't. But I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts. Right. So grab us on social media and let us know your thoughts on this one. And we'll be back next week. Next week it'll be Morgan's case. So have a great week. And for now, be nice.
And bye.